Hi there, I am the Overall Nerd, and welcome to our latest video. Who is the best fighter in the Rocky franchise? Now, I have been a massive fan of Rocky for the longest time, and now that Creed 3 is out, I think we can all agree that Rocky is probably one of the best franchises out there. But one question keeps racking my brain. Who is the best? Now, spoiler alert, I don't have Rocky at number 1. I know, but just hear me out. I'm looking at more than popularity. In this video, I'm going to attempt to logically rank the fighters using only what we have seen in the movies and the context of their fights. So without further ado, let's get started. Coming in at number 10, we have Mason Dixon, by far the worst fighter on this list in terms of skill and heart. Yes, he is the champion at this point in time, but the movie goes out of its way to tell us that he has had no worthy opponents and that boxing is a dying sport due to lack of competitiveness. In all fairness, this doesn't seem to be his fault, but it proves that he wasn't forged in fire like a lot of the fighters on this list. He's never had to dig deep and keep moving forward, if you know what I mean. And if that's not enough to convince you, his most challenging fight was a 50-year-old Rocky Balboa, who actually managed to knock him down, and only won on a split decision? If that doesn't justify him being the worst boxer in the series, I don't know what does. Coming in at number 9, we have what was maybe once a great fighter, but by the time we see him in Creed, is arguably only slightly more skillful than Mason Dixon. We have Pretty Ricky Conlan. Yeah, that was his name for those of you who don't remember. Now, it may be a surprise to you to see Conlan solo down on this list, but if you take into account what we see in Creed and Creed 3, it's most certainly not a surprise. Similar to Mason, who never should have won on a split decision to an old Rocky, Conlan never should have won on a split decision to a young Adonis. Not to mention how easily a close of a time in Creed disposes of him in their second fight. This really shows how levels below Conlan really is. I again feel that, like Mason Dixon, he fell victim to a lack of competition and allowed his ego to outgrow his skill, heart, and determination to be the best. Perhaps he underestimated Creed, but no champ of the world should have to be saved by the bell against a fighter who at the time only had one credible fight. Now, this is where my list, I think, gets really interesting. At number 8, we have, in my opinion, one of the best characters in the franchise, Diamond Damien Anderson. Now, this pick has some tragedy behind it. Every fighter in this list we are analysing in their prime, but not Dame. Damien never got to live his prime. By the time he came out of prison, he was already at retirement age. Yes, he was in shape, but as Adonis says to him in the movie, boxing is a young man's game. Perhaps this is why Damien had to resort to fighting dirty, to somehow make up for his lack of youth. Now, some of you may be thinking that Damien could beat Rocky, or even Drago, and to that I say, please stop drooling over his abs and please think about it. Yes, he beat Felix Chavez, but take into account these 3 points. He had sparred Felix multiple times. Felix severely underestimated him, and of course, Damien slowly wore Felix down by fighting dirty, constantly punching his arm, kicking his knees, and of course giving him a solid elbow to the face. Oof. On top of this, we don't actually know much about Felix Chavez. Yes, he was the champ, but he didn't win those belts off Creed. For all we know, he could have been a paper champion, or beaten a paper champion for the belts. Yes, Damien put up a good fight with Creed, but this wasn't prime Adonis Creed, not even close. This was a Creed who had been retired for 3 years and was both physically and mentally out of the game. We even see in his training how he had forgotten basic fundamentals and had to dig down deep to remember the fighter he once was. I strongly believe that the Creed who fought Drago in Creed 2 would have beaten Damien quite convincingly. It is sad we'll never get to see Diamond Dame in his prime, as I'm willing to bet he would be so much higher on this list. At number 7, we have Tommy Gunn. Tommy Gunn is very similar to Damien, yet opposite. Opposing the peaking too late, he peaked way too early. Tommy had the potential to be amazing. He was being trained by Rocky and was knocking out everyone who came in his way, going on to be heavyweight champion of the world by beating paper champion Union Kane. But he was raw and untamed. I wasn't capable of doing some smart thinking, as Rocky would like to say. Similar to Clubber Lang, his fighting style was quite aggressive, but he wasn't able to separate his heart from his skill. But again, he was young. If he had just stayed with Rocky and not given in to temptation, he could have been one of the greats and learned what it truly meant to be a champ. Instead, he gets beaten up by a brain-damaged Rocky. I think a fight between him and Damien would be interesting, as neither got to experience their true primes, but I'm inclined to think that his youth and power would be too much for Diamond Dame to handle. That's why Tommy Gunn here is at number 7. At number 6, we have what is probably the best brawler in the series, the man who was able to outbrawl the great Rocky Balboa. We have Clubber Lang. The sheer strength and power of this man is insane, and as far as we know, he's the only fighter Rocky Balboa has ever been afraid of. I see him as someone similar to what Damien would have been in his prime, except a lot less skill. Lang relied on his power, and this made up for his lack of defense. In his first fight against Rocky, he won simply by outpowering him, to the point where Rocky admitted that he couldn't keep him off him. This was because Rocky was so used to being the aggressor that facing a fighter like Clubber left him without an edge. Clubber's biggest drawback was his gas tank, hardly able to go past 3 rounds due to his explosive output, and Rocky was able to take full advantage of this, and using Apollo's fluid boxing style, managed to tire Clubber out to the point where he could barely hold his hands up. A boxer's gas tank is just as, if not more important than punching power, so as good as Clubber was, he lands at number 6. We are now in the final 5, and number 5 for me might be a bit controversial, but I have a strong opinion. Number 5 for me is Victor Drago, son of the legendary Ivan Drago. Now, I know Victor Drago is big and powerful, but I'm yet to see him put in a legendary performance. Yes, I know he absolutely obliterated Creed in their first fight, and I'm not taking anything away from him, but Creed should have done better in that fight. Rocky even says, "You're playing his game," and I blame this on who I think is actually the worst coach in the whole franchise, Lil Duke. How is your number 1 priority not to teach your fighter to fight on the inside against an opponent who is so much taller than him? Like, why did Creed have to have Rocky teach him that? It's so obvious. Yes, beating Creed was a tremendous feat, but I think it was more Creed's ill preparation rather than Drago's skill. Similar to Clubber Lang, Drago's gas tank wasn't the best, seeing a noticeable change in his output around round 6. He also clearly didn't respond well to being hurt by a new and improved Adonis Creed, having to resort to fight dirty in order to get an edge. I did find myself wondering if Victor Drago was so good, why hadn't he won the belts in the 3 years since Creed retired? Also, the fact that a retired Adonis was able to eventually match him in sparring just shows that he really isn't up to scratch. Nothing like his father. Hopefully we see him reach his full potential in the Drago spin-off movie, but as for now, he lands at number 5. At number 4, we have our main man, Adonis Creed. Now, fans of this franchise have been divided on whether Adonis could stand toe-to-toe with the greats on this list. My answer is no, he can't. Adonis is an interesting character, no doubt. Seeing him grow in his own trilogy has been amazing, but I just don't think he has what Rocky and Apollo had before him. He has tremendous heart, but is held back by the weight of carrying that Creed name. He is so concerned with what people think about him that he isn't able to think for himself. For example, taking that Drago fight purely because he thought people would think less of him if he didn't. Although this isn't a character study, mentality plays a huge part in a fighter's ability. We see Adonis get brutally knocked down in all 3 of his major fights, get back up and go on to win their respective fights. I hear fans say that Adonis is the perfect combination of Rocky and Apollo, mixing heart and skill. And via this logic, of course he beats everyone on this list so far. But could he beat a fighter like Rocky with arguably more heart than him? Or Apollo with way more skill and flair? I don't think so. Rocky's constant attacks, along with his ability to get back up, I feel would overwhelm Adonis, and Apollo's hit and move approach would be too fast for Adonis to counter. We need to bear in mind that all of Adonis' opponents were either past their prime, underestimating him, or didn't have a gas tank. Yes, he beat them fair and square, of course he did, but it was never purely because he was a better fighter. He also had the best trainer in the game, the legendary Rocky Balboa. I do love Adonis Creed, and I think he's been an amazing main character for us in this trilogy and has really brought the Rocky franchise back to life. Unfortunately, I just don't think he's better than our top 3. Now, just before I get into my final 3, guys, if you made it this far into the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like down below, and that would mean the absolute world to us, and if you enjoyed, please subscribe for more overall content. My number 3 fighter in the Rocky franchise is the great Ivan Drago. Now, as much as I hate putting a steroid user in my top 3, this really shouldn't be a surprise. This is the man who killed Apollo Creed in the ring, albeit an old Apollo Creed, and gave Rocky brain damage to the point where he had to retire. This man was a menace. Standing at 6'5", it's hard to imagine him not beating everyone on this list, including his own son Victor. Yes, of course, he has the advantage of being absolutely massive, but that doesn't take away from his credibility. In real boxing, you can use your natural strengths to your advantage, although I don't know if natural is the right word to use when talking about Ivan Drago. Before Rocky, he had a boxing record of 31 wins by KO, which is just insane. He adopted a predator-style approach, starting a fight off slow, allowing his opponent to feel some sort of security by letting them land a few shots on him. Then in a flash, he would unload and overwhelm them with power shots. Apollo Creed fell victim to this trap, unable to move as fluid as he used to and not having nearly as much power. He had been retired for 5 years at this point and was almost twice the age of Drago, not to mention the false comfort he felt, it being an exhibition, and his gross misjudgment of his own abilities, stating he was the strongest and fastest he's ever been. I do think Prime Apollo would defeat Drago, not by knocking him out, but by sticking and moving and dodging Drago's best punches, winning by decision. Again, boxing is about hitting and not being hit, and no one knew how to do that like Apollo Creed. Drago's loss to Rocky was an interesting one. He started off strong, taking Rocky's best punches to the body. But once he was cut, his whole demeanour changed, as if he had brought into the myth that he was a machine. Drago, unlike his son, was able to go 15 rounds with Rocky before being knocked out, meaning his gas tank was as good as they come. I like to think of Drago's true self being in the Rocky fight opposed to the Apollo fight, purely just because, as I said before, Apollo was old. However, his gas tank definitely gives him the edge over many of the fighters on this list, as he can sustain his power for the whole fight opposed to just the opening rounds like Victor Drago or Clubber Lang. All of this makes him a formidable opponent for any fighter and has earned him a place in the top 3. At number 2, we have the man, the myth, the legend, Rocky Balboa. See, I told you he wasn't coming in first, it wasn't just clickbait or anything. Rocky is defined by his greatest attribute, his heart. He didn't have the best skills or best technique. In fact, he had lost over 20 fights by the time we see him in Rocky 1. But his keep moving forward attitude gives him the edge over everyone on this list so far. Rocky entered his prime in his late 30s, opposed to the average boxer, and was able to stand toe-to-toe with the heavyweight champion Apollo Creed and go on to beat him in the following fight. He's the only fighter we see evolve. He starts off as a brawler with a big heart, but took too much damage, as we can see by his face at the end of both fights. If we were judging Rocky by the first 2 movies, I would have him around number 7 or 6 on the list, as this Rocky was outbrawled by Clubber Lang. But by Rocky 4, he's able to have the skills to match the heart and really became a great fighter. He's the only fighter on this list who could knock out Ivan Drago. Rocky is an anomaly. He shouldn't be as good as he is, but he just is. He always has a chance, as seen with an older Rocky who was able to go the distance at the age of 50 with Mason Dixon. He is a fighter through and through. He doesn't say he's the best. He doesn't think he's the best. He doesn't fight for power or pride. He fights for love and does what needs to be done. Again, if this was a character analysis, Rocky would be at the top of the list. But no, this is about the greatest fighter, not just someone who fights great. On to our final pick, and ladies and gentlemen, you know who it is. In my overall opinion, the greatest fighter in the Rocky franchise is the one, the only, Apollo Creed. Yes, of course it has to be the OG champion Apollo. The way this man fought was next to none, not even being replicated by his own son. Very much like Muhammad Ali, he would float like a butterfly and sting like a bee, constantly moving and jabbing. So fast and so strong, bearing in mind that the Creed we saw was at the end of his career. Now, I know a lot of fans would say that Rocky was better because he beat him, but come on, let's break that down. Overall, they had 3 fights. The first one, Apollo won on a decision. We need to take into account that Apollo, towards this stage of his career, had become a victim of his own hubris. He hadn't even been knocked down in his career of 46 wins by KO. As a result, he severely underestimated Rocky and barely even trained. Despite this, he still managed to come away with a win, showing that even his natural talent was enough to beat a fired-up Italian stallion. Now, the second fight was arguably lost due to Creed's persistence on a knockout. He trained properly and was determined to defeat Rocky, and he basically won every round. Rocky took an even worse beating than he did before and was clearly being outboxed, but he just wouldn't stay down, a testament to the heart we were talking about before. If Creed just swallowed his pride and just stayed away like his trainer was begging him to do, then he would have just stayed the champ. Instead, he tried to brawl with the brawler, and Rocky sent him to the ground, beating him by 1 second, which sent Creed down a path which would eventually lead to his death. Don't get me wrong, there's no doubt that Rocky won that second fight, but personally, I believe that Creed wins 9 times out of 10 against Rocky. This opinion is only proven even more by the fact that Creed won that third fight against Rocky, the secret third fight they had. He won that, despite Rocky at this point knowing how to box as well as brawl. Now, regarding his loss to Drago, well, his death to Drago, I've already explained how that a prime Creed would be able to outbox Drago. maybe not knock him out, but definitely outbox him. Stay away from him, jab, 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 move, 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 hit and not get hit, and win on points. His skills were next to none, and he would be able to outbox any fighter on this list. Prove me wrong. He had the heart of a champion and went out the way he came in, a fighter. That's my rankings of the best fighters in the Rocky franchise. Let us know what you think down below. Please like and subscribe if you like this list, and if you agree, let us know in the comments below. This has been Overall Nerds. Peace.